They say children are resilient, that they forget, that time heals all wounds. But does it really? Some wounds are silent, some absences are invisible. A child may be fed, clothed, sent to school, praised for grades, yet never truly seen. The world assumes that if no bruises remain, the pain never existed. And so a quiet epidemic grows, the invisible suffering of children who were ignored not out of malice, but from oversight, distraction, or misunderstanding. Have you ever wondered why some adults feel hollow around praise, or distant from intimacy, or restless in moments meant for joy? Could it trace back to the whispers of neglect they endured as children, small, almost imperceptible, yet relentless? This is not a story of blame. It is a journey into understanding, into recognizing the quiet echoes that shape us long after childhood ends. Let us begin. And from the earliest moments of life, a child is attuned not just to words, but to the spaces between them, to the silences that linger in rooms meant to feel safe. Some children grow up in houses where voices are present, but attention is scarce, where meals are shared, but eyes never linger long enough to see who they are inside. The ignored child learns quickly that absence can speak louder than presence, that being unseen is a language all its own. You may not remember the first time you felt invisible. Yet somewhere deep in memory, there is a sensation, a hollow echo when your cries were met with distraction, or your excitement met with indifference. The mind registers these small voids, each one a sediment layered quietly over months and years, forming a subtle map of the world the child believes they must navigate alone. Neglect is rarely dramatic. It is often whispered in the margins of daily life, in the moments adults are too tired or preoccupied to notice. It is the book never read aloud, the question unanswered, the hug postponed indefinitely. It is not cruelty, it is omission, and yet omission is no less powerful. Children seek validation instinctively. Even the slightest acknowledgement becomes a beacon. Yet when those beacons are consistently dimmed, the inner world begins to adjust. A child learns to shrink, not because they are weak, but because the environment does not respond to their light. This adaptation is both protective and corrosive. It keeps them safe from repeated disappointment, while quietly shaping the architecture of self-perception. What does it feel like to grow up in a room filled with people yet surrounded by silence? Can joy exist alongside a sense of emptiness? Can laughter mask a longing that no one will name? These are questions that the ignored child carries forward, often unconsciously shaping relationships, emotions, and self-understanding. And so the first layer of experience is formed, not in grand gestures, but in quiet omissions. The child learns early the delicate art of being small, the subtle skill of fading into the background. It is here the roots of later patterns begin, the invisible foundations of mistrust. Self-doubt and longing for connection are laid here in the silent beginning. The mind of a child is a sponge, but also a mirror. It absorbs not only the words spoken, but the silences left behind. Each moment of being unseen becomes a subtle imprint, shaping how the child perceives the world and themselves. Emotional neglect is recorded quietly yet persistently, forming invisible neural pathways that influence thought patterns, emotional responses, and relational expectations. Your attachment begins in the earliest interactions. The infant who reaches for attention and finds only distraction or indifference internalizes a belief that connection is unreliable. This is not conscious. It is encoded in the brain as a framework for interpreting social signals, a template that will silently guide choices in relationships long into adulthood. The child learns to predict absence, to anticipate disappointment, and to manage emotions preemptively to protect against further invisibility. Neuroscience shows that repeated lack of emotional attunement alters the architecture of the brain. The amygdala becomes vigilant, hyper-aware of subtle cues. The prefrontal cortex may struggle to regulate feelings of anxiety or self-doubt, and the reward system may fail to recognize joy when it appears. The body and mind store these experiences in ways that feel automatic, almost inevitable, but are in truth traces of adaptation. Cognitive schemas form early and quietly. The child begins to believe their feelings are unworthy, their needs inconvenient, or their presence irrelevant. These schemas are not truths, they are survival mechanisms, yet they become lenses through which life is interpreted, making even ordinary social interactions fraught with hesitation, self-monitoring, and quiet fear of rejection. And the psychology of the ignored child is not about brokenness. It is about adaptation, about an inner architecture designed to endure absence without collapse. However, this architecture comes at a cost. The adult may carry a persistent sense of emptiness, a hypervigilance for subtle neglect, and a quiet struggle to trust others or themselves fully. Understanding the mind's quiet architecture allows us to see the child within, with clarity and compassion. To recognize these patterns is not to assign blame, but to illuminate the invisible structures that shape emotional life. Awareness opens the possibility of reflection, understanding, and eventually gentle integration of what was endured in silence. And as the ignored child grows, the quiet imprints of absence begin to stir complex inner conflicts. Feelings of longing mix with self-doubt and confusion. The child wonders silently if their needs are too much or if their presence is a burden. These questions echo in adulthood, shaping relationships, emotions, and self-perception in ways often invisible even to themselves. Internalized narratives emerge. The child learns to tell themselves stories to explain the absence. They may believe I am unworthy, or I am invisible, or if I existed differently, I would be noticed. These stories are survival strategies, protective in origin, but corrosive in their persistence. They cast shadows over joy, making the experience of validation feel precarious, fleeting, or undeserved. Resistance builds naturally within the psyche. The ignored child may push against intimacy out of fear of repetition of old patterns or cling desperately to validation when it appears. Even success or recognition can feel hollow if it does not come with deep attunement from others. The mind struggles to reconcile desire for connection with anticipation of neglect. Emotions become a terrain of subtle negotiation. The child learns to mask feelings to avoid disappointment, to soften reactions to protect themselves from repeated invisibility. Anxiety, shame, and quiet sadness may become companions that are neither named nor addressed, but shape every choice and interaction. Have you ever noticed how some adults hesitate to express need, how they shrink in groups, how praise feels uncomfortable or joy fleeting? These are the shadows of early neglect, the inner conflicts quietly steering behavior and perception. Self-doubt is not failure. It is memory, it is adaptation, it is the residue of being unseen. Recognizing these shadows is the first step toward understanding. Their presence explains without excusing. It illuminates patterns long-lived and often unquestioned. It allows the ignored child to meet themselves with curiosity and compassion, acknowledging that the inner conflicts are reflections of circumstance, not character. There comes a moment in life when the quiet lessons of childhood surface with startling clarity. A memory, a reaction, a pattern in relationships suddenly reveals itself as part of a larger map. The ignored child begins to notice how the absence they experienced has shaped their expectations, how it has whispered messages of unworthiness and invisibility into every corner of their adult life. These moments of realization are rarely dramatic. They arrive as soft recognitions in ordinary situations, a hesitation before speaking up, a subtle anxiety in connection, a discomfort with attention or praise. Each is a signal the mind sends to illuminate the invisible architecture formed long ago. The child who once learned to shrink now sees the patterns that guided them silently and persistently. The adolescence often brings these awakenings with intensity. The teen feels emotions more acutely, relationships more precariously, and self-perception more fragile. The early absence of attunement may become glaring against a backdrop of peers whose needs are met and whose presence is acknowledged. This contrast awakens both grief and longing, awareness and confusion. In adulthood, realization can be quieter yet profound. A lingering discomfort in intimacy or a persistent sense of emptiness in achievement can trigger reflection. The adult begins to trace these sensations back to origins long overlooked, the subtle neglect that never left a mark, yet left everything else behind. Recognition is a turning point, not because it changes the past, but because it offers perspective. It allows the ignored child to meet the adult self with understanding and curiosity, to see that patterns are adaptive memories, not defects, to acknowledge that the absence once endured can now be observed without judgment and with gentle compassion. Healing for the ignored child is rarely sudden or dramatic. It unfolds quietly in the spaces between thought and emotion, in small acts of recognition and self-awareness. The first step is simply noticing the absence that shaped you, acknowledging that it was real and that its effects are valid. This recognition is not blame. It is truth. It is the gentle illumination of what was endured. And the process often begins with reflection. The adult revisits early experiences not to dwell in pain, but to understand the patterns they created. Emotional integration occurs as the child within is met with compassion and acceptance rather than judgment or expectation. The subtle wounds that once dictated behavior begin to soften as awareness grows. Validation becomes an internal practice. The child learns to affirm their own feelings, to honor their needs, to recognize that being seen by oneself is a crucial foundation for all other connections. The mind and heart gradually rewrite old narratives, transforming "I am invisible" into "I notice myself, I am present, I am worthy of attention." Relational understanding also plays a role. Healing is supported when relationships provide attunement, empathy, and consistent acknowledgement. The ignored child gradually learns to accept presence and care without suspicion, and to participate in connection without fear of being overlooked. Small rituals and quiet practices help anchor this transformation. A reflective journal, a moment of meditation, a pause to notice bodily sensations. These are the ways absence is replaced with awareness and self-care. With time, the patterns of invisibility give way to intentional presence and subtle confidence. Healing is not about erasing the past, it is about integrating it, meeting the child who endured neglect with kindness and gently reclaiming the light that was once unnoticed. There is a stillness that comes after recognition, a gentle space where the echoes of the ignored child can be felt without alarm or judgment. In this quiet, the journey of understanding takes on a poetic rhythm. The subtle erosion of absence meets the slow flow of self-awareness, and the fragments of the past begin to align like river sediment, forming a new landscape within. The ignored child is both unique and universal. Each story is different, yet each carries common threads of longing, invisibility, and adaptation. In reflection, we see that resilience does not mean the absence of pain. It is the capacity to endure, to observe, to recognize, and to gradually reclaim the self that was quietly overlooked. What metaphors of light and water are fitting here? The light does not rush. It glows softly, illuminating the contours of memory and experience. Water moves slowly, eroding sharp edges, smoothing the roughened terrain of emotional life. Both remind us that healing and awareness are processes, not destinations, and that patience is an essential companion. The quiet also invites a deeper empathy for oneself and others. The ignored child within can be met with compassion for the adaptations made, the strategies developed, and the survival skills acquired over years of subtle neglect. Reflection is the bridge between the past and the present, allowing the adult self to integrate understanding with acceptance and gentle care. And in this reflective space, the invisible becomes visible, and the unheard voice can finally be acknowledged. The journey of the ignored child is not erased by time, but can be held with tenderness and awareness, creating a foundation for presence, self-acceptance, and quiet peace. If this video made you feel seen, if parts of this reflection felt familiar, if something quiet inside you was touched, know that you are not alone. The journey of the ignored child is often solitary, yet it is shared in the invisible threads that connect all of us who have experienced absence, unnoticed attention, deferred, or subtle neglect. Yet emotional validation is simple, yet profound. To acknowledge your feelings, to accept that your longing for recognition was real, is a first step toward gentle healing. Connection can also emerge through community, through safe spaces where voices are heard, and presence is acknowledged without judgment. This is the subtle power of shared experience, the quiet reassurance that your story matters. You do not need permission to feel your emotions, to honor your needs, or to recognize your presence. The process of gentle integration begins with noticing yourself and the child within. Each acknowledgement, each moment of self-recognition is a ripple that restores what was quietly diminished. If you would like to stay connected, this channel is a space to explore the hidden corners of the human heart, to reflect on emotions often overlooked, and to witness the invisible struggles that shape us all. Sharing your experience in the comments is optional, yet your words may help someone else feel less alone. Take care of yourself. You deserve gentleness. You deserve to heal.